Divorce pace hit the marble floor of the courthouse hallway like an afterthought, a single sheet that it had taken 3 years to produce and less than 4 seconds to sign. Adrian Voss stood in the corridor, watching his wife walk away, and the thing that gutted him wasn't the finality of it. It was how straight she held her spine. No trembling, no hesitation at the door. Alara Vele pushed through the heavy glass exit without a single backward glance, a small battered suitcase rolling behind her. And Adrian Voss, a man who had made generals sweat and rivals disappear, felt something cold and unfamiliar settle behind his sternum. He told himself it was nothing. He was wrong. If you've ever underestimated someone who loved you quietly, if you ever mistook silence for weakness, then this story is going to hit somewhere you didn't expect. Stay with us. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop a comment right now telling us what city or country you're watching from. We want to know how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning had started the way most bad mornings did for Adrian Voss, with a phone call he didn't want to take and a face he'd trained himself not to read. His attorney, Gerald Fitch, had met them both in the courthouse lobby at 8 sharp. Fitch was the kind of man who wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent and smiled at everything with the same precise warmth of a hotel concierge, pleasant, professional, and entirely empty. He'd laid the documents across a low table between 2 chairs that Adrian and Alara occupied like strangers at a bus stop. Adrian hadn't looked at her much. That had become a habit somewhere in the 2nd year of their marriage, not looking directly at Alara. She had a way of watching him that made him uncomfortable without ever saying anything accusatory. Just watching. Patient and still, the way a naturalist studies something in the field. She wore a gray linen blazer he didn't recognize. No jewelry. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, and she sat with her hands loose in her lap. And when Fitch pushed the documents toward her, she signed without reading them. Adrian noticed that. He signed things without reading them, all the time. It was a power move, a signal that you trusted your people, or that you simply didn't care about the details. But when Alara did it, it didn't read like arrogance. It read like someone who'd already memorized every word on every page long before the meeting. He didn't say anything about it. Fitch thanked them both in the practiced tones of a man who presided over endings for a living. Alara nodded politely. Adrian shook Fitch's hand. And then it was done, and they were walking out of the same building in opposite directions, and the marble floor was cold underfoot, and Adrian Voss had officially cut away the one thing he'd publicly called his greatest vulnerability. He stood at the corridor's tall window and watched her cross the plaza below. She moved without urgency. The suitcase was small carry-on sized, and he'd had a moment watching her pack it 2 nights earlier where he'd expected her to take more, to make it dramatic, to weep or argue or demand things. Instead, she'd filled the case with a few folded items and left the rest of their shared apartment undisturbed, as though she'd never really moved in. He was still watching her cross the plaza when his phone rang. It was Declan Marsh, his head of private security. Declan had worked for Adrian for 11 years and had the vocal range of a man who'd surgically removed every emotion from his voice except caution. "Boss, we've got something." "Not now, Declan. You're going to want now." Adrian exhaled through his nose. He was still watching Alara below. She had reached the far edge of the plaza and paused, and for one stupid second, Adrian thought she was going to turn around. She didn't. She flagged a black car, not a cab. Something private, and it pulled smoothly to the curb. "What?" Adrian said. "Someone just purchased the entire Harwick Marina." Adrian turned from the window. "All of it?" "The slips, the dry dock facilities, the commercial pier, the warehousing, full acquisition. Cash, who?" The pause that followed was precisely 1 beat too long. "Your ex-wife, boss." Adrian stood very still. Outside, the black car had swallowed Alara and pulled into traffic. "Say that again." "Alara Vale. The paperwork cleared this morning. Transaction was filed at 7:42 a.m. Another pause. "About 18 minutes before you walked into the courthouse." Adrian's jaw tightened. He turned back to the window, but the plaza was empty, now just gray stone, and a few pigeons working the cracks in the pavement. "Get me everything you have on that acquisition," he said, "and I want eyes on her now." He hung up. He stood at the window for another moment, and the cold thing behind his sternum had become something else entirely. Not grief, not regret. Something sharper and more alert, like the feeling, before a fight, when the air pressure changes and your body knows before your brain does, that the situation has shifted fundamentally. He should have looked at her more carefully. Declan had a preliminary file ready within 40 minutes. Adrian reviewed it in the back seat of his car, reading fast. His reading glasses on a small vanity he permitted only in private. His driver, Torres, knew better than to speak during review sessions. The city moved past the tinted windows, gray and indifferent. The Harwick Marina acquisition was clean on paper, immaculately clean. The purchasing entity was a holding company called Saltwater Meridian LLC, registered in Delaware 18 months ago. Saltwater Meridian was itself owned by a Cayman Islands parent called Vantage Reach Holdings, which was in turn connected to a Swiss asset management firm that Declan's people hadn't yet fully penetrated. Adrian tapped his finger against the page. He knew how shell structures worked. He used them himself. The architecture of this one was not amateur work. It wasn't even intermediate work. The layering was precise and deliberate, with the kind of redundant insulation you only build when you expect serious scrutiny from serious people. Said, someone with significant resources and significant enemies had built this. He flipped to the next page. The marina's flagship slipped, the largest covered berth, capable of housing a vessel over 200 feet, had already been occupied as of 9 a.m. that morning. Satellite imagery, pulled by Declan's people within the last hour, showed a black-hulled luxury yacht moored there. Long, sleek, clearly custom-built. The image resolution wasn't perfect, but the vessel's name was visible along the transom in understated silver lettering, the Vale Fortune. Adrian pulled off his reading glasses and sat back. He knew that name, not because it was famous. It wasn't famous, not publicly, not in the way that flashy oligarch yachts tended to become topics of gossip in the ports where they docked. He knew it because he had spent 14 months, 3 years ago, trying to identify the owner of a vessel by that name that had appeared in the backgrounds of 3 separate intelligence photographs, taken at meetings he'd been trying to surveil. The Vale Fortune had been present at a private meeting in Malta, involving 2 arms traffickers Adrian had been building a case against for potential leverage. It had appeared again, off the coast of Monaco during a gathering of figures from 3 different European financial crime networks. And it had been photographed a 3rd time in a private harbor in the Azores, alongside a vessel owned by a man named Reyes Cortez, a figure Adrian had significant professional interest in, for reasons he kept close. He had tasked Declan with identifying the yacht's owner. Declan, who was not a man who failed often, had come back to him after 6 weeks with nothing actionable. The ownership trail was buried so deep and in so many jurisdictions that even their best contacts in maritime registry systems couldn't crack it cleanly. Adrian had eventually moved on to other priorities. Now he sat in the back of his car, looking at a grainy satellite image of that same vessel moored at a marina that his ex-wife had purchased 18 minutes before signing their divorce papers. And he understood with the particular clarity that arrived only at moments of genuine shock that he did not know who Ilara Valle was. He had thought he did. He had thought the shape of her was simple, quiet, composed, somewhat distant, a woman who made good coffee and read paperback novels and never asked about his work and occasionally stared out windows in a way that he'd always interpreted as a kind of mild sadness. He had been catastrophically wrong. "I want her background pulled," he told Declan when he reached the office. "Everything, from birth. Don't use the regular team, bring in Harmon." Declan nodded once. Harmon was not on payroll. Harmon was a former federal investigator who operated in the gray space between licensed private investigation and outright intelligence work, and he cost an extraordinary amount of money and delivered results that justified it. Adrian had used him twice before. Both times the results had been deeply uncomfortable. "What am I looking for specifically?" Declan asked. "Everything she hid from me." He said it flatly, without anger. Anger was a temperature you couldn't maintain across a long investigation. Adrian had learned that young. Declan left. Adrian stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his 43rd floor office and looked at the city below and tried to reconstruct Ilara from memory. Not the surface version, not the linen blazer and the quiet coffee mornings, and the way that she said goodnight from across the bed with the particular careful politeness of two people who had stopped reaching for each other. The version underneath. The things he hadn't paid attention to. She had never asked about his work. He had registered that as relief. He dealt with men who married women who wanted access to his world, who thrilled at proximity to power, who asked questions he had to deflect and manage. Alara had never once asked. He had taken that as disinterest. She had worked from home, some kind of consulting. She'd said strategic advisory for international businesses. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't cared enough to push. He'd had his world, and she'd had hers, and the marriage had been a convenient arrangement that had grown out of a brief, genuine attraction that neither of them had been emotionally available enough to sustain. Or so he'd believed. He thought about the consulting, the hours she kept sometimes early, sometimes the middle of the night, the glow of her laptop visible under the bedroom door at 2 a.m. He had assumed restlessness, insomnia. He had not assumed she was running a network of layered offshore corporations while lying 3 feet away from him. Phone buzzed. A message from Declan. Harmon is available. Starting tonight, Adrian typed back, good. Tell him I want origins. Not recent history, the beginning. Who she was before I met her. He set the phone down and picked up the satellite image again. The Veil fortune. He'd spent 14 months chasing a ghost. The ghost had been sleeping in his bed. Harmon delivered a preliminary package within 36 hours faster than Adrian had expected, which meant either the trail was unusually accessible or Harmon was working multiple sources simultaneously and burning favors to do it. Adrian read it alone. No Declan, no staff. He sent everyone out of the office and sat with the file at his desk, and within the first 10 pages, he understood why Harmon had moved quickly. There was almost nothing there. That was the revelation. Not Secret's absence. Alara Valley's documented history before the age of 24 was sparse in a way that was not accidental. There were records. Yes, a birth certificate from a mid-sized city in Connecticut, school enrollment records through high school, a brief college attendance record from a state university she had apparently left without graduating. The texture was missing. No photographs in any public database. No social media presence of any kind, not even dormant accounts. No credit history before 24. No employment records in any accessible system. People didn't disappear like that naturally. They were either very poor and very invisible, or they had been deliberately scrubbed. Alara Vale had clearly been the latter. Then Harmon had included a single photograph, printed on standard paper, with a handwritten note clipped to the corner. This is where it gets complicated. The photograph was 12 years old, pulled from a private archive by means Harmon hadn't specified. It showed a formal event of some kind, a dinner or a reception, judging by the clothing. In the right third of the frame, partially turned away from the camera, stood a younger Alara. She was perhaps 22 in the photograph. Her hair was different, shorter, lighter, but the posture was unmistakable. That spine, that quality of absolute stillness in a crowd. She was beside a man Adrian recognized, Victor Lane. Adrian set the photograph on the desk. Victor Lane had been one of the most influential private financial architects in the world. Not a criminal, exactly, but a man who existed at the intersection of legitimate enterprise and the kind of money that required significant discretion. He had built a financial empire that spanned 8 countries and touched industries ranging from pharmaceutical distribution to port infrastructure to private security contracting. He had been murdered 11 years ago in what was publicly ruled a robbery at his estate in Geneva, a ruling that approximately 0 people in the relevant communities actually believed. His empire had dissolved after his death, or rather, it had appeared to dissolve. Adrian had always suspected that the assets had been moved rather than liquidated, distributed through instruments so complex that no single regulator had ever assembled a complete picture. He looked at Alara in the photograph, standing beside Victor Lane, at ease in a way that spoke of familiarity, not occasion. He pulled out Harmon's note from the back of the file. Subject's real name, Elena Vane. Born to associates of Victor Lane's financial network. Orphaned at 14 when parents died in a car accident. Circumstances disputed in private intelligence files. Subsequently became a ward of the Lane household, not through official adoption, but through a private arrangement. Lane's own estate documentation, obtained through a source I won't name here, lists her as his designated successor in strategic affairs. She left his household at 21, under circumstances unknown, changed her identity through a process I haven't been able to fully reconstruct, and surfaced as Alara Vale 3 years later. Adrian stopped reading. He sat with that for a long moment. Designated successor in strategic affairs. She hadn't come to him as a wife. She had come to him as something far more calculated, and the question that had been quiet in the back of his mind since the courthouse, why him? Why their marriage? What she had actually wanted from 3 years of careful proximity, suddenly sharpened into something urgent and cold. He picked up his phone and called Declan. I need the full breakdown of every business in our market sphere that we've identified as competitor adjacent in the last 3 years. Not rivals adjacent, the ones we couldn't quite place. That's a long list. Then start pulling it, and cross-reference the ownership structures against a Delaware holding company called Saltwater Meridian and a Cayman entity called Vantage Reach Holdings. Silence on the line. Boss, Declan said slowly. How deep do you think this goes? Adrian looked at the photograph of Alara beside Victor Lane. Deeper than I want it to, he said. Start tonight. Cross-reference results came back in pieces over the following 18 hours, and each piece made the picture uglier. 7 businesses, 7 separate entities that Adrian's intelligence team had flagged over the past 3 years as minor irritants competitors in ancillary markets. Firms that occasionally undercut his logistics pricing or mysteriously secured contracts his people had been targeting. He'd never treated them as a coordinated threat because there was no surface-level connection between them. Different industries, different regions, different management structures. Vantage Reach Holdings was the silent parent of 3 of them. 2 more traced back to a Luxembourg investment vehicle that Harmon had identified in a supplemental note as almost certainly connected to the Lane network's surviving infrastructure. Adrian sat with this information and felt something he rarely allowed himself, a genuine, unguarded sense of having been outmaneuvered. She had been in his market, living in his home, sleeping in his house, drinking coffee across the table from him in the mornings, and simultaneously operating a parallel presence in his commercial sphere that he had never connected to her. Not because he was careless. He was not a careless man. But because the architecture was so clean, and because he had never, not once, considered the possibility that the quiet woman reading paperbacks on the far side of the bed was the entity he'd been watching move money through his market for 3 years. He was still processing it when Marcus Rain walked in without knocking. Marcus was Adrian's most trusted lieutenant and had been for 7 years. He was 40, lean, with a quality of compressed energy that made people in rooms instinctively track his movements. He had helped Adrian build the current organization from a significantly messier inheritance, and there were things Adrian had told Marcus that he'd never told anyone else. I heard about the marina, Marcus said. He dropped into the chair across from Adrian's desk with the ease of a man who considered the room his own. Declan's been quiet. That usually means something's wrong. Something's complicated, Adrian said carefully. Alara, what do you know? Marcus spread his hands. I know she bought the marina. I know you've had Harmon running background. And I know you look like someone just told you the floor you've been standing on is actually water. He paused. How bad is it? Adrian considered what to share, even with Marcus. Especially with Marcus, he rationed information by instinct. It was how he'd survived this long. She's not who she presented herself as, he said. Who is she? Still working on that. Marcus nodded slowly. He seemed to be choosing his next words. You know there have been conversations, before this week, among some of the senior people. Adrian looked at him directly. What kind of conversations? Concerned ones. About whether the marriage created exposure. About whether she had access to things she shouldn't have had access to. Marcus met his gaze steadily. I want you to know I always shut those conversations down. But now I'm wondering if I should have listened harder. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Adrian, there are people in this organization who think Alara was placed next to you deliberately. That the marriage wasn't coincidence. That she's been building a position inside your world for 3 years. And the divorce is the beginning of the play, not the end of it. The room was very quiet. Adrian said nothing for a long moment. He was watching Marcus the way he watched everything, cataloging detail. The lean, the eye contact, the precise careful weight of that last sentence. "Who's saying this?" Adrian said. "Multiple people. Can give you names." Marcus's voice was level, reasonable. "But the more important question is whether they're right, and if they are, what she's planning to do next." Adrian looked at the photograph, still sitting on his desk. Lara beside Victor Lane, a woman who had been someone else before she was anyone he knew. "I'll handle it," Adrian said. Marcus nodded, stood smooth at the front of his jacket. "I know you will," he said. "I just want to make sure you handle it before she does." He left. Adrian sat alone in the quiet office and looked at the photograph and thought about the way Alara had signed those papers without reading them. The way she hadn't looked back, crossing the plaza. The way she had seemed, in the moment of departure, not like someone leaving, like someone arriving. He went to the marina at 11 that night. He hadn't told Declan. He hadn't told Marcus. He had driven himself, which he rarely did, in an unremarkable car he kept registered under a subsidiary name for exactly this kind of quiet movement. He parked outside the Harwick Marina's main gate and sat for a moment looking at the lights on the water. The Vale Fortune was visible at the far end of the main pier, illuminated softly from below, its black hull reflecting the dock lights in long, rippling strips. At this distance, an hour, it looked like something from a different world than the one Adrian occupied. Not ostentatious, just completely, utterly sure of itself. He had security credentials that opened the gate, a legacy of business dealings with the Marine's previous owners. The new credentials hadn't been revoked yet. He didn't think about whether that was an oversight or an invitation. He walked the length of the pier. A man appeared at the yacht's boarding platform. As Adrian approached one of two, he registered quickly, with a third visible on the upper deck. Not ostentatious security, efficient security. The kind that positioned itself correctly and didn't move unnecessarily. "She's expecting you," the man at the platform said. Adrian stopped. "Is she?" "Yes, sir." He stood there for a moment. The water moved against the hull. The night was cool and smelled of salt and engine oil and something faintly expensive, like cedar or sandalwood, drifting from the open salon behind the deck. He walked aboard. Alara was sitting in the yacht's main salon with a glass of water and an open laptop, dressed in dark slacks and a simple top, her hair down now. She looked up when he entered, no surprise, no performance of surprise. Just looked at him the way she always had. Patient, steady. "You could have called," she said. "You changed your number." "I changed several things today." She closed the laptop and set it aside and folded her hands in her lap. "Sit down, Adrian." He didn't sit. He stood near the doorway and looked at the room, taking stock, the way he always did. The salon was furnished with the kind of spare precision that cost a great deal more than obvious luxury. Nothing decorative that wasn't also functional. Good sightlines to both exits. He clocked two of her security people, visible through the glass partitions. "The Vale Fortune," he said. "You want to explain that?" "Eventually." She looked at him calmly. "But first I want to know how much Harmon found." He felt his expression tighten. "You know about Harmon. I know you have 3 contractors you use for sensitive background work. Harmon is the best of them and also the most expensive, which means when you hired him, you were genuinely alarmed. Not just curious." She paused. "So tell me what he found." "Elena Vane," Adrian said. "Victor Lane, the Delaware holding company. 7 businesses in my market." Something moved across her face, not guilt, not fear. Something closer to assessment. She was weighing what he knew against what she'd expected him to find. "That's a reasonable start," she said. "A reasonable." He stopped. He was not a man who raised his voice as a rule, but the control required to not raise it right now was conscious effort. "You've been running companies inside my mark sphere for 3 years, while living in my home, while calling yourself my wife. While being your wife," she said, and her voice carried a precision that stopped him. "I was your wife. That part wasn't a performance, Adrian." She looked at him steadily. "The rest of it is more complicated than you're going to be comfortable hearing. Try me." She opened her mouth to answer. And then the first gunshot cracked across the marina like a stone through glass, and the lights on the pier went dark. and everything that had been complicated became immediately, violently urgent. Adrian moved before he processed the decision. He crossed the salon in 3 steps and grabbed Alara's arm, and she was already moving, already turning toward the back of the vessel, already pointing, already knowing where the secondary exit was, and he understood in that fragmented, adrenaline-bright moment that she had planned for this too. He just didn't yet know who had pulled the trigger, or whose side they were on. The marina erupted around them, and the woman Adrian Voss had spent 3 years dismissing as ordinary pulled a firearm from beneath the salon's side table, with the practiced ease of someone who kept it there, specifically for moments like this, and looked at him with those level, watching eyes, and said, "We need to move now. And when this is over, you're going to listen." The second gunshot came from the opposite direction of the first, and that told Adrian everything he needed to know about the geometry of the ambush they were boxed. Port and starboard, the open water behind them, and the pier ahead already compromised. He didn't say any of that out loud. He just moved. Elara was already 3 steps ahead of him, moving through the salon's rear passage, with the weapon held low and close to her body, muzzle angled at the floor in the controlled way you only learned from serious instruction, not from a weekend course, not from a nervous husband who'd thought his wife should know the basics, from someone who'd invested real time in the mechanics of staying alive. Adrian filed that away and followed her. The passage opened onto the aft deck, and the moment they cleared the threshold, the night came alive with motion shadows. At the end of the pier moving fast, the sound of boots on aluminum dock grating, a harsh male voice barking something in a language Adrian couldn't immediately place. Not Spanish, not Russian, something Eastern European, clipped and urgent. Alara pressed herself against the outer wall and looked at him. Her breathing was controlled, which was more than he could say for his own pulse. "How many people did you bring?" she said quietly. "None." Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "You came alone. I drove myself. That was stupid." "I'm starting to think so." She exhaled through her nose and tilted her head toward the starboard side. "There's a rigid inflatable on the lower platform. My people have the code, but they're pinned at the bow." She paused. "Can you get to it?" "Depends on what's between me and it. At least 2. Maybe 3. He looked at her. 3 years of marriage, and he had never seen her like this, stripped of the careful domestic composure, the deliberate quietness. All of it gone, and underneath was something he recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror every day of his adult life. Someone who had been operating in dangerous spaces for so long that danger had become a kind of native language. "Give me 30 seconds, he said. "You'll need the code." She said it fast, 6 digits, and he committed them without repeating them back, which she noticed. He went over the rail. The lower platform was a narrow fiberglass shelf just above the waterline, accessed by a ladder bolted to the hull. He descended fast and quiet, the metal cold under his hands, the water black and slapping below. He could hear the firefight above and forward-controlled bursts, not panicked shooting, which meant both sides had trained people. That was worse than chaos in certain ways. Chaos made mistakes. Trained people made decisions. The inflatable was there, a gray rigid hull boat with a 50-horsepower outboard tethered to a cleat on the platform. He punched in the code on the lockbox and pulled the cover, and the engine primed on the first attempt. He held it there, idling low, and looked up. Alara appeared at the rail above him. She came down the ladder with one hand, the weapon in the other, and dropped the last 4 feet into the inflatable with a thud that rocked the whole thing sideways. She had a cut on her forearm shallow, from glass or metal, that she hadn't had 30 seconds ago and wasn't bothering to look at. "Go," she said. He went. The inflatable punched out into the dark water between the piers and Adrian, pushed the throttle forward, and the marina receded behind them in a wash of noise and yellow dock light. The sounds of the gunfight becoming small and then smaller, and then just part of the general noise of the city at night. Neither of them spoke for 2 full minutes. Adrian drove. Alara sat at the bow, facing backward, watching the marina shrink, the weapon still in her hand but no longer raised. Her hair was loose and tangled from the movement. She had a piece of dock grating grime across her left cheekbone. "Your people," he said finally. "Are they going to be all right?" Nadia and the two on the bow have handled worse. She said it without particular comfort, just information. Sai will have gotten the others off the vessel before anyone reached the salon. She paused. They're professionals. How many professionals? Enough. He looked at her across the length of the inflatable, spray coming over the bow in cold sheets. That's an answer. It's the answer I'm giving you right now. She turned and looked forward at the dark water ahead. Where are we going? Somewhere I control. She was quiet for a moment. Are you sure you still control it? He didn't answer, because the honest answer was that he was no longer sure of that at all. The safe house was a converted loft above a commercial print shop in the warehouse district, one of 4 properties. Adrian maintained under names that didn't exist, stocked and checked on a rotating basis by a single person who knew about all 4 and talked to absolutely no one. He had never brought anyone there. Not Marcus, not Declan, not any woman he'd been with in the years before Alara. He brought Alara. He told himself it was tactical. She's the most immediate source of information about what had just happened at the marina, and information required proximity. Subtly, he did not examine the decision more carefully than that. She sat at the kitchen table while he ran water over her forearm at the sink. The cut was longer than he'd thought, 4 inches, along the outside of the forearm but shallow, and it had already mostly stopped bleeding. He found a first aid kit under the sink and applied it with more competence than she seemed to expect. You've done that before, she said. Field dressing. You pick it up. She watched his hands. Did you know Marcus was feeding information to outside parties? Stopped. He set down the roll of gauze and straightened and looked at her directly. Where did that come from? The attack tonight wasn't random, she said. It wasn't a rival testing our vulnerability or a street-level crew getting ambitious. Coordinated. The approach vectors. The timing relative to your arrival. Someone knew you were coming to the marina, Adrian. You didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell anyone, he confirmed, and felt the weight of what she was implying land fully. Then someone tracked you. She held his gaze. Or someone told them to watch for you, making exactly that kind of unannounced move. He sat down across from her. The kitchen was small, lit by a single overhead bulb, the kind of light that made everything look a little harder and older than it was. She looked tired now that the immediate action was over a specific kind of tired that accumulated, not from one night, but from a long time of being careful. You're saying Marcus, he said. I'm saying the attack had inside information. Marcus is the only person in your organization who would have predicted that you'd go to the marina alone rather than through Declan. You'd have to know Marcus very well to understand how he reads me. I've been studying your organization for 3 years, Adrian. She said it without apology. I know how Marcus reads you. He absorbed that. Why, he said. Why study my organization? Give me the version that isn't you deciding how much I can handle, and just tell me the actual reason. She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating to selecting. He was beginning to understand the difference. Victor Lane wasn't murdered in a random robbery, she said. You know that. Anyone who knew anything about the relevant world knows that. She looked at him. He was killed because someone wanted to absorb his network without inheriting his enemies. A controlled demolition kill the man, disappear the assets, fold the infrastructure into an existing operation before anyone could trace the transaction. And you spent 11 years figuring out who did it. I spent 11 years building enough of a position to do something about it when I found out. She turned the gauze on her arm absently, not looking at it. Victor was the only family I had after I was 14. He was difficult and paranoid and sometimes ruthless, and he was the only person who gave a damn whether I lived or died. She stopped. So yes, I have been working toward this for a long time. Adrian's hands were flat on the table. He kept his voice level. And what does my organization have to do with it? Whoever killed Victor has been systematically acquiring territory on the East Coast. Your territory. They've been doing it through proxies and shadow acquisitions for this Orban's 4 years, and your people either haven't noticed or haven't told you. The 7 businesses I had positioned in your market sphere weren't competition, Adrian. They were a monitoring network. I was watching the same predators you should have been watching. The room was completely quiet. Somewhere outside, a truck shifted gears going uphill. You were watching who, he said. The organization Marcus Rain has been quietly building a relationship with for the past 18 months. Adrian said nothing. It's called the Celan Group, Ilara said. They're not East Coast. They move through European financial infrastructure, but their operational reach has been expanding west. They identified your organization as the primary obstacle to controlling the northeastern port corridor, and they've been preparing to dismantle it. She paused. Marcus has been their access point. He started passing information 14 months ago. Small things at first. Schedules. Personnel. Then bigger things, vulnerabilities. Protected assets. People you trust. Adrian stood up from the table. He walked to the window and looked at the street below. An empty block, 3 a.m. Yellow pools of streetlight on wet pavement. You have documentation, he said. It wasn't a question. Enough. Why didn't you come to me with this? The silence stretched. Because, she said carefully, one of the things I needed to determine was whether you were aware of what your father did to Victor. He turned from the window. She was looking at him, steadily, and there was something in her expression that he hadn't seen there before, a careful, wary attention, the way you watch someone's face when you're about to say something that can't be unsaid, and you need to know their response before you can plan your next move. Say that again, he said. Your father, Henry Voss. Her voice was even. He had a business relationship with Victor Lane that went back 20 years. When Victor began consolidating assets that threatened certain arrangements Henry had with the Celan Group's predecessor network, Henry made a decision. She didn't look away from him. I spent 9 years believing your father ordered the hit on Victor and that you knew about it, that the marriage was a way to get close enough to verify. The space between her last sentence and his response was the longest Adrian had felt in years. You believed I was complicit, he said. I believed you might be. And now I believe you weren't. She said it plainly, without softening it into reassurance. Not because you're a good man necessarily, but because I have watched you for 3 years and I know the specific ways you are and aren't your father, and knowingly ordering the death of a civilian is one of the things you aren't. Adrian stood very still. He thought about his father, a distant, controlled man who had built an empire on the principle that sentiment was a structural weakness. He thought about the things he had inherited and the things he had changed and the things he had told himself he'd changed while possibly only relocating them to a different shelf. He never told me, he said. I know, she said. I believe that now. Kitchen light hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly and moved on. The divorce, he said. He had to say it. He needed the shape of it in the room. Timing. You bought the marina before we signed. The holding company was already built. You planned the exit. I planned the exit, she confirmed. The divorce dissolved the last legal instrument tying my financial identity to your organizational structure. My assets were restricted as long as I was your wife, certain international agreements, certain treaty provisions around organized crime-adjacent spousal assets. The moment the marriage ended, the restrictions lifted. You engineered it. Yes, you used me to, he stopped himself, breathed. You used our marriage as a legal instrument. I entered the marriage for operational reasons, she said. That's true. And somewhere in the middle of it, other things happened that weren't operational, and I don't know what to do with those things yet. But I won't lie to you about the beginning. She looked at him. You deserve the honest version, even if it's the version that makes you want to put me out the door. He looked at her for a long moment. She didn't look away. The Celan Group, he said. They attacked the marina tonight because someone told them you'd be there alone, and that Ilara Vale, whoever they think I am, would be isolated on a vessel without organizational backup. She shifted in her chair. They wanted to eliminate us both in the same operation. Clean, attributable to a territorial dispute, no fingerprints pointing back to them. And Marcus set it up. Marcus coordinates with their operational liaison. Has been for over a year. Adrian moved back to the table. Sat down. The tiredness was arriving now, that delayed physical accounting that the body sent after adrenaline receded, a full inventory of all the wear it had absorbed. I need to move against Marcus before he knows the hit failed, he said. Yes. If he knows you're alive and with me, he'll escalate, she finished. He'll tell the Celan Group that the direct approach failed, and they'll shift to something wider, less targeted. She paused. More destructive. Adrian's jaw set. How fast can you mobilize your people? The full network. 48 hours for a full deployment. I have maybe 18 before Marcus starts to wonder why he hasn't heard confirmation. She thought about it. Then we use the 18 for positioning and the remaining 30 for execution. You're very calm about this. I've been preparing for this specific scenario for 2 years. She looked at him. I'm calm because I planned it. I just didn't plan on you being in the room when it started. Something shifted in the air between them, not warmth exactly, but a kind of stripped-down mutual recognition. 2 people in a small kitchen at 3 in the morning with the same set of enemies, and a history that was neither clean nor simple, deciding whether to trust each other enough to function. There's one more thing, she said. Of course there is. The evidence I have on Marcus, the documentation linking him to the Solen group. I've had it for 8 months. Her hands were still on the table. I waited to use it. I wanted to be completely certain before I gave you something that would destabilize your entire organization. Adrian looked at her. What else? She held his gaze, and for the first time he saw something under the steadiness, something that had been maintained for a long time at significant personal cost. The man who physically coordinated the hit on Victor Lane, she said. The one who was actually on the ground in Geneva. He's been inside your organization for 4 years. Not Marcus, someone else. Someone you trust at a different level. The words landed like stones into standing water, and the ripples were immediate and terrible. Who? Adrian said. Alara said a name, and Adrian Voss, who had believed genuinely for 4 years that this man was unshakable, felt the ground he was standing on become something else entirely, and understood with absolute clarity that after this moment, there was no version of his organization, his world, or his understanding of the last decade that remained intact. There was no going back to this morning. There was no going back to the courthouse, or the 3 years before it, or the story he had been telling himself about who was dangerous and who was not. There was only forward, into a war he hadn't known was already being fought, beside a woman he had never actually known, against people who had been inside his house for years. He reached for his phone. He had 18 hours. The name Alara said was Cyrus Fell. Adrian sat with it for 3 full seconds before he moved, and in those 3 seconds, the last 4 years rearranged themselves around a single fixed point, the way iron filings rearrange around a magnet, everything snapping into a new configuration that made horrible perfect sense. Cyrus Fell had come to the organization 4 years ago through a referral from a legitimate security consulting firm Adrian had used for physical infrastructure work. He was 51, former private intelligence, with a reputation for methodical work and an absence of personal drama that Adrian had valued immediately. He ran logistics on the organization's most sensitive asset movements. He had access to the internal communication architecture. He attended the weekly security review and had never once said anything that felt wrong. Adrian had trusted him with the kind of information that didn't have a recovery mechanism if it was compromised. How long have you known? He said. His voice came out flat, not angry flat, which was worse. Alara had spent enough time near him to know the difference. 8 months since I had confirmation, she said. 14 months since I had suspicion. You sat on it for 14 months. I sat on suspicion. When suspicion became documentation, I had a different problem. She watched him carefully. Fell isn't just a Solen Group asset. He's their architect on the East Coast. If I moved against him without absolute certainty and complete preparation, they would have known their position was blown and gone dark. We'd have lost the trail entirely. So you waited. So I built. Adrian stood up from the table. He moved to the far wall and stood with his back to her for a moment. And she let him have it, didn't fill the silence, didn't explain further. She just waited, which was the thing she was best at, and which had driven him quietly insane throughout their marriage, without him ever understanding why. Turned around. Does Fell know about tonight? If Marcus told him yes, then I have less than 18 hours, probably less than 12. She stood up as well. Fell knows your emergency protocols better than almost anyone. If he suspects the marina operation failed, he'll start pulling threads before Marcus tells him to. He's not the kind of man who waits for instruction. No, Adrian said. He's not. He picked up his phone and looked at the screen for a moment without dialing. There was a specific and terrible mathematics to this moment, the number of people He could still trust it measured against the number of people who now had reason to move against him. And the arithmetic was not in his favor. Declan, he said, thinking out loud. I believe Declan is clean, Alara said, based on everything I've observed. But you'll have to make that assessment yourself. You know him better than I do. I've known Fel for 4 years. She had the decencies not to respond to that. He called Declan. The phone rang 4 times long enough that Adrian felt the particular cold of waiting, the way those extra seconds metastasized into scenarios, and then Declan picked up, voice rough with sleep. Boss, it's 4 a.m. I know what time it is. Where are you right now? A pause. Declan had been in this work long enough to hear the quality of urgency in Adrian's voice and respond to it without wasting time. Home. Alone, stay there. Don't go into the office. Don't contact Marcus, and do not, under any circumstances, talk to Cyrus Fel. Do you understand me? Another pause longer. I understand you. Do I get a reason? When I see you in person. 3 hours. Place we talked after the Renfrew situation. I'll be there. He hung up, looked at Alara. The Renfrew situation was a code we set up 18 months ago for a meeting location he'd recognize, and no one else would. If Fel's been monitoring internal communications, he won't have that context. Good, she said. That's good thinking. Don't do that. Do what? Manage me. I'm not one of your operational assets. She held his gaze without flinching. I know you're not. The moment stretched and then passed, and they moved on, because they had to. The first indication that things had deteriorated faster than expected came at 6:47 in the morning, when Adrian's secondary phone, a number only 4 people, had received a message from a blocked source. Photograph. The photograph showed the interior of Adrian's main headquarters building. Specifically, it showed the private server room on the 14th floor, which contained the encrypted communication architecture for the organization's most sensitive operational channel. The server room had 3 layers of access control and was monitored by 2 cameras, whose feeds went to a closed system accessible only to Adrian and Declan. In the photograph, the server room was open and empty. The servers were gone, not damaged, not destroyed. Removed cleanly, systematically, the racks empty, and the cable management left in place like a display of particular contempt. Adrian showed Alara the photograph without a word. She looked at it for a long moment. When was this taken? The timestamp says 2:14 a.m., while we were in the water. Fel moved the moment the marina operation started, she said. He didn't wait to hear whether it succeeded. This was already in motion. He used the operation as cover, Adrian said. Everyone watching the marina, everyone focused on the firefight, he had a clean window. He's been planning this extraction for months, Alara said. The marina attack wasn't meant to kill us. Or not only that, it was meant to create a window. Adrian set the phone on the table. His hand was steady. The rest of him was something else. What was on those servers? She said carefully. He looked at her. The specific look of a man deciding how much truth a situation required. Everything, he said. The full communication log for the past 3 years. Asset locations. Banking infrastructure. Protected witness arrangements. He stopped. Names of people who provided information to us in confidence. People who would be in immediate danger if that information reached the wrong hands. Alara sat down slowly. How many people? 11. Maybe 12, depending on what Fel had access to read. The silence was the particular kind that follows a statement that can't be walked back. 11 or 12 people whose safety had just been handed to an enemy, and the clock on their exposure was already running. I need to reach them, Adrian said. Each of them, before Fel can move the data downstream. Fel's already moving it downstream, she said. Not cruel, just precise. The moment those servers left the building, the Solan group had access. We're not ahead of this. We're reacting to it. Then I need to react faster than they can use it. She was already reaching for her own phone. Give me the names. I have channels that don't touch your organizational infrastructure. They can't be traced through anything Fel had access to. We can get warnings out in parallel. He looked at her. Adrian. Her voice had a specific gravity. Give me the names. He gave her the names. She worked while he sat. Across from her, watching her move through a communication sequence that was clearly practiced in multi-layered different devices for different channels. kind of operational security architecture that took years to build correctly. He watched her and thought about 3 years of evenings in their shared apartment. Her laptop open on the coffee table, him assuming she was handling routine consulting work. She had been doing this exact thing, building the network that was now, potentially, the only infrastructure he had left. They worked for 90 minutes before meeting Declan. Declan looked like a man who had aged 4 years since the previous afternoon, which was what happened when you were a careful, methodical person, and the ground, or carefully maintained operation, suddenly turned out to be hollow. He sat across from Adrian and Alara in the back booth of an all-night diner neither of them had used before, a mug of coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched, and he listened to the complete picture without interrupting. When Adrian finished, Declan was quiet for a long time. "Fell," he said finally. "Fell." Declan looked at the table. "I reviewed his quarterly access log 6 months ago. Nothing flagged." "He knew how to not flag," Adrian said. "He built the logging system." Declan absorbed that with the specific expression of a man cataloging his own failure. "And Marcus? Marcus has been coordinating with the Solen group for 14 months. And you knew about this." Declan's eyes moved to Alara. "Not hostile assessing. The way he assessed everything." "For how long?" "Long enough," she said. "I moved when I had something actionable to offer. You could have come to me. I didn't know if you were clean." He took that without resentment, which told Adrian something important about Declan's character, and also about how bad the morning had already made him feel. "Fair enough," he said. "What do we have left?" "Your people," Adrian said. "The ones who report only to you, whose loyalty I can verify through you. The external network Ilara's been building, which I have not yet fully been briefed on. And 18 people who don't know they've been potentially compromised. 12 of the 18 have already been reached," Alara said. "My people are on the remaining 6. Declan looked at her with something that was almost reluctant respect. "Your people?" "Yes, how many?" "Enough to matter." She looked at Adrian. "I told you 48 hours for full deployment. We start now, we can compress that. But we need a plan worth deploying for, not just a defensive scramble." Declan turned his coffee mug in a slow circle. "Marcus will know by now the marina didn't produce results. He'll be managing managing the Solan group's timeline, trying to figure out where Adrian is and whether he's operational." "He'll assume I'm in the wind," Adrian said, isolated. "Without the server infrastructure, he'll think my communications are down." "That's an advantage," Alara said. "A short one." "How short?" She thought about it. "Marcus knows how you operate under pressure. He'll give you 12 hours of being in the wind before he decides you're either dead or rebuilding. Once he decides you're rebuilding, he'll move to accelerate whatever the Solen group's endgame is." She paused. "What is their endgame specifically?" "The port corridor," Adrian said. "Control of the northeastern port infrastructure. Shipping, logistics, the physical movement of goods and money through 6 major port facilities." He looked at her. "It's what they killed Victor Lane for. His network controlled 3 of those facilities. My organization controls 2 others. And the 6th, independent, old family operation, been there 30 years. He paused. "They're going to hit it too. The Castellan family." Alara's expression shifted just slightly, just at the edges. "Nadia warned me 2 hours ago that there's been unusual surveillance activity around the Castellan operations primary facility. They're moving on multiple fronts simultaneously. That's what you do when you have the infrastructure data from a server pool," she said. "You don't need to wait for the right moment anymore. You have the map. You move on everything at once." Declan set his mug down. "Then we have less time than 12 hours. "Yes," Alara said. "We do." The call came while they were still in the diner, and it came from the number Adrian would have least expected. Came from Marcus. Adrian looked at the screen, felt Alara's attention sharpening across the table. Showed her the screen. She nodded once answer it. Picked up. "Marcus, you're alive." Marcus sounded neither relieved nor disappointed. He sounded like a man making an assessment. "I wasn't sure. The marina was messy." "It was. Where are you?" "Not somewhere you can reach." Adrian kept his voice level. "Which you already know, or you wouldn't be calling instead of sending people." Pause. "I want to talk." "You're talking, in person. An hour." The warehouse at Kellner Street, you know the one. Come alone. Adrian said nothing for a moment. He looked at Alara. She was already writing something on a napkin. He slid it across the table. Don't go. Not yet, make him wait. I need 2 hours, Adrian said. 1. 2, Marcus. Take it or I don't come. Silence. Then, 2 hours, alone. The line went dead. Declan was already shaking his head. Trap, obviously, Adrian said. Then, because knowing where Marcus will be in 2 hours is worth something. He looked at Alora. Can you get people to Kellner Street without using any channel that's touched your Vantage Reach infrastructure? Yes. How many enough? He looked at her. Stop saying that. 6, she said. And they're better than 6 of Marcus's people. They'll need to be. He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. We're not going to walk into his meeting. We're going to let him set it up, let him bring whatever he's planning to bring, and then change the terms of engagement entirely. He looked at Declan. I need you running the building approach. External positions only do not enter. Your job is to map whoever Marcus brings, and make sure we don't get boxed the way we got boxed at the marina. Declan nodded. And you? I'm going to find Fell. Table went quiet. Fell won't be at Kellner, Alara said carefully. He's not the type for direct confrontation. He'll be managing the server data extraction, making sure the transfer to the Solen group is clean and complete before Marcus's meeting either succeeds or fails. I know where he'll be, Adrian said. She looked at him. There's a secondary facility, he said. Not on any organizational chart, not in any document Fell had access to through legitimate channels. It's been in my family since before I took over. He paused. It's where I would go to complete a data transfer if I wanted to make sure nothing could interrupt it. How does Fell know about it? Adrian looked at his hands on the table. Because it's where my father conducted his most sensitive meetings, he said. And I found records 4 years ago of Fell having visited that facility twice during my father's tenure. He stopped. I hired him anyway, because his referral was clean and his record was clean, and I told myself those visits were historical context, not ongoing connection. Larisfa said nothing. You were right, he said, about my father and about what he was connected to. I've been managing the inheritance of that connection my entire career without fully admitting what it was. She still said nothing. I'm admitting it now. He looked at her directly. Does that change your position? She held his gaze for a long moment. No, she said. It confirms it. The facility was a building in the Port District that appeared on every public record to be a bonded storage warehouse for a textile importer that had closed 9 years ago. The building was maintained to look abandoned, peeling paint, a loading dock with one broken light, chain link fencing with a padlock that worked. Inside, the basement level was climate-controlled and comprehensively wired. Adrian approached it from the east, on foot, alone, at 9:17 in the morning. He had left Alara, coordinating the Kellner Street, positioning, with Declan, which he had accepted without argument, which itself told him something. Because Alara did not accept limitations without reason. She had looked at him before he left and said only, "Don't let him see you coming," which was not the warning it sounded like. It was the instruction of someone who had studied Fell for over a year and knew specifically how his threat perception worked. The loading dock was quiet. The chain-link gate was unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. Adrian stopped at the gate and looked at it, and felt the specific cold of a situation that has been prepared for your arrival. The unlocked gate was not an oversight. Fell was too careful for oversights. The unlocked gate was an invitation, which meant Fell knew he was coming, which meant either the facility had surveillance he hadn't accounted for, or someone had told Fell to expect him. He stood at the gate for 4 seconds. Then he went in, anyway, because the alternative was retreating to a position where he had no leverage and no information. And he was tired of having no information. The loading dock was empty. The interior door was also unlocked. He moved through the ground floor bare concrete, the smell of old paper and machine oil, and found the basement stairs, where he'd always found them, behind a false wall panel in the southwest corner that opened with a switch disguised as a light's socket. He went down. Fell was sitting at a table in the center of the basement level, with a laptop open in front of him and a half-eaten sandwich to one side, and he looked up when Adrian came through the door with the specific expression of a man. who has been waiting and is glad the waiting is over. You made good time, Fels said. Adrian stopped 10 feet away. The room was well-lit fluorescent, cold light that made everything look clinical. He could see the laptop screen from where he stood, a transfer progress bar, almost complete. Whatever was on those servers was moving somewhere, right now, in this room. Close the laptop, Adrian said. It'll close when the transfer completes. Fel didn't move. 4 minutes, maybe 5. Then it closes itself. He looked at Adrian with a kind of flat, professional assessment that had nothing in it resembling apology or guilt. You could have stayed missing. That would have been the smarter play. I want the servers back. Fel almost smiled. That's not going to happen. The data then, whatever's transferring, stop it. Also not going to happen. Fel folded his hands on the table. He was not armed, as far as Adrian could see, which was its own kind of statement. You came alone. I came alone. That's not like you. I'm having an unusual week. Fel looked at him for a moment. How much do you know? About you? Enough. About what you've been building for the Selene Group. Most of it. About what happened to Victor Lane and who arranged it. Adrian held his gaze. All of it. Something moved across Fel's face, the first genuine reaction Adrian had seen. A brief tightening around the eyes that could have been surprise or could have been calculation. Henry Voss, Adrian said. My father. He contracted you to coordinate the Geneva operation. You were the operational architect. You did the logistics, managed the team, managed the cover story. His voice remained flat. And then you spent 11 years staying close to the Voss organization to make sure no trace of your involvement ever surfaced. And 4 years ago, you got even closer. Fel was quiet for a moment.
Your father was a practical man. Don't.
He made a business decision that protected an arrangement worth considerably more than... I said don't. Adrian took one step forward. You're going to tell me where the data transfer is going. Right now. Or what? Fel's voice was completely calm. You shoot me and the transfer completes anyway. You walk out and the transfer completes anyway. There isn't a version of the next 4 minutes where you stop it, Adrian. You don't have the access. And the failsafe protocol means the moment anyone attempts to interrupt it remotely, the entire package gets pushed immediately rather than on the scheduled delay. He looked at Adrian with something almost like pity. The smart move is to let it complete, and then we have a conversation about what comes next. For you, there are options that don't end badly for you personally. You want me to make a deal. I want you to be realistic. About what? About the fact that then Selene Group controls the port corridor as of approximately. Fel glanced at the laptop. 2.5 minutes from now. Whatever you think you have left, whatever your ex-wife has been building on the side, it doesn't change the fundamental geography. He paused. We know about her network. We've known about Vantage Reach for 6 months. We let it develop because it was useful intelligence. The Selene Group isn't afraid of Alara Vale. Adrian went completely still. We know what she is, Fel said. We know what Victor made her, and we know she's been working with you since last night. He tilted his head, which means she walked into the same closing trap you did. The marina, this facility, Kellner Street, it's all the same operation. Marcus has a very specific surprise prepared for whoever shows up at Kellner in another glance, about 90 minutes. Adrian's phone was in his hand before he finished the sentence. It was already ringing, and it rang 4 times, and 5 and 6, and Alara did not pick up, and the transfer progress bar on Fel's laptop reached 100%, and the screen went dark, and in the basement of his father's most private facility, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he thought he'd understood, Adrian Voss finally hit the bottom of it. He called 6 more times in 90 seconds. Nothing. Then he did the thing he hadn't done in years. He moved without a plan. Pure instinct, pure forward motion, the kind of decision-making that lived below the cerebral cortex in the older, faster parts of the brain that didn't wait for analysis. He crossed the basement in Drunnost. He crossed the basement in 3 strides, grabbed Fel by the collar of his jacket, and pulled him out of the chair with a force that sent the laptop skidding off the table and clattering to the floor. Fel didn't fight it. That was the worst part. He came up out of the chair without resistance, with the resigned ease of a man who had already accounted for this possibility and decided it was manageable. Kellner Street, Adrian said. His face was 4 inches from Fel's. What does Marcus have waiting there? More than you can handle alone. How many? 8. Maybe 10. Plus, whatever the Solon group sent as insurance. Fell's voice was completely even, which was either genuine calm or the best performance Adrian had encountered in 20 years of dealing with dangerous people. If your ex-wife walked into that building, she's already contained. Marcus doesn't kill unnecessarily. She's worth considerably more alive as a negotiating instrument. Adrian let go of him, not because he was done, because holding Fell wasn't getting him to Kellner Street any faster, and every second he spent in this basement was a second he didn't have. You should stay here, Fell said, straightening his jacket with a precise, almost domestic motion. Think it through. Alara Vale walked into a controlled situation with trained people and a building Marcus knows floor by floor. There is nothing you can do in the next 90 minutes that changes that math. Adrian was already at the stairs. Adrian. Fell's voice followed him up. Your father understood when to absorb a loss. It was his best quality. He didn't answer. He came up through the false wall panel and through the ground floor and out the loading dock into the gray morning air, and he was already on the phone, not Alara's number this time, but Declan's. Declan picked up on the first ring. Where are you? Adrian said, already moving toward the fence line. 3 blocks east of Kellner. I've got visual on the building. Boss, there's significant activity inside. At least 6 vehicles arrived in the last 40 minutes, all parking in the rear lot out of street view. Alara, did she go in? A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Declan. One of her vehicles arrived 22 minutes ago. 2 of her people went in through the side entrance. Another pause. They didn't come back out. Adrian stopped walking. He was standing on a sidewalk in the Port District, with the morning light hitting the pavement at a low angle, and the city was moving around him with complete indifference. A delivery truck grinding through a gear change, a woman with a coffee cup walking fast, a pigeon working the gutter, and he was calculating the fastest route to Kellner Street and the probability that Alara was already in a room with Marcus Rain and no good options. I'm 12 minutes out on foot, he said. Where are your people positioned? 4, external. I pulled them back when I saw the vehicle count, didn't want to tip our presence. Good. Hold them, don't move until I'm on site. He started walking again, fast. Declan, what's the building layout? You know Kellner, 3 floors. Open warehouse ground level, office space second and third. 1 central stairwell, 1 fire exit on the north face. Loading dock on the south side, that's where the vehicles are. There's a roof access point, but the ladder's external and visible from the rear lot. Ground level entry points. 3. Main roll door on the south, personnel door on the east. The size entrance Alara's people used on the west. A pause. West entrance is the quietest approach. It runs along a dead alley, no sightlines from the rear lot. I'm taking the west. Boss. There are at least 10 people in that building. I know. You're alone. I know, Declan. A breath on the line. I'm moving my people to support positions. Exterior only if anything comes out that shouldn't come out. Handle it. He hung up. He moved through the Port District streets at the edge of a run, cutting through a loading area, across a chain link gap he'd used years ago for a different and simpler emergency. And the 12 minutes became 9 and then 7. And then he was standing at the mouth of the dead alley, on the west face of the Kellner Street warehouse, and the morning was quiet enough that he could hear, faintly, voices from inside. He went in. The west entrance was a steel door with a push bar, propped open half an inch by a folded piece of cardboard. Someone's people going in and out and getting lazy about the latch. He eased through it with his shoulder against the frame and stood in the shadow inside, letting his eyes adjust. The ground level was mostly dark. High industrial windows let in gray morning light in long diagonal strips that caught dust moving in the air. The space smelled of old machinery and recent cigarette smoke. He could see the shapes of 2 men near the south roll door standing, not moving, the body language of people waiting. Couldn't see their faces. Voices from above. 2nd floor. He found the central stairwell without using his phone light, moving along the wall by feel and the ambient light from the windows. The stairwell door was steel, slightly ajar. He eased it open 6 inches and listened. Marcus's voice, from somewhere above, appreciate the difficulty of your position. Truly. But the position is what it is, and the longer we spend. A second voice. Alara's. You're welcome to keep explaining it. I have time. She was alive. She was talking, which meant she was thinking, which meant she had not given up anything yet, because Alara did not talk when she had nothing to say. Adrian went up the stairs. He moved on the outside edges of each step, the structural point least likely to creak, and took 15 steps in about 40 seconds, which was not fast but was quiet. The second-floor landing had a small window looking onto the interior of the main office space, and he stopped there and looked through. The scene was immediately clear. Alara was seated in a metal chair in the center of the room. Not restrained, her hands were in her lap, loose. But Marcus was standing 8 feet away, with 2 men flanking him, and there were 2 more men near the windows, and the geometry of the room made standing up and leaving a specific kind of impossible. Marcus looked calm. He always looked calm. It was the thing about him that Adrian had once considered an asset, and now recognized as a quality of a different kind of person, entirely the specific calm of someone who had made a decision a long time ago about what mattered and had been living downstream of that decision ever since. Alara's face was composed. She had a small cut above her left eyebrow that hadn't been there this morning from the vehicle approach, maybe, or from the entry. Nothing serious. But she was reading the room the same way Adrian was reading it, from the stairwell window, and as he watched, she shifted her weight slightly in the chair, and he understood that she was not waiting to be rescued. She was waiting for the right moment to do something. He needed to give her the moment. He moved away from the window and continued up the stairs. The 3rd floor was unoccupied open space, old office furniture stacked against one wall, 2 skylights letting in gray morning light. He moved to the floor and found the structural point above the 2nd floor office, the gap where the stairwell ran, adjacent to an equipment chase, and he could hear Marcus's voice clearly. Now, the words resolved. The Selene Group isn't interested in your network as a threat, Marcus was saying. They're interested in absorbing it. Victor Lane built something that still has operational value. You've maintained and expanded it. That's worth something at the table. You want me to come to a table, Alara said. I want you to be practical. About what, specifically? About the fact that Adrian Voss is currently in a basement meeting with Cyrus Fell, and that conversation has only 2 outcomes. Either Fell convinces him to accept terms, or Fell manages the situation in the other way. A pause. Either way, you're operating without your primary alliance, as of this morning. My primary alliance, Alara said flatly. You came back to him last night. Don't pretend it wasn't a strategic decision. It was absolutely a strategic decision. Then be strategic now. The port corridor is done. That infrastructure belongs to the Selene Group as of approximately an hour ago. What remains is the question of what happens to the people and networks that were built around it. Marcus's voice had a reasonable quality that Adrian knew was the most dangerous version of Marcus, that version that had convinced people over the years that he was the most sensible person in the room. Your Vantage Reach infrastructure still has value. The Lane network's surviving components still have value. What the Selene Group is offering, Marcus. Alara's voice cut across his. Where is Adrian? A short silence. That's not your concern right now. It's my only concern right now. You're not in a position. I'm in whatever position I decide I'm in. Her voice was completely level, and Adrian could hear something in it that he recognized the sound of a person who has already made their calculation and is simply waiting for execution. You built this entire operation on the assumption that separating Adrian and me would leave both of us isolated. You told the Selene Group that we were each other's blind spots, that the way to neutralize us both was to make sure we never understood each other well enough to function together. She paused. You were right about the blind spots. You were wrong about the conclusion. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, searched the stairwell. Adrian was already moving. He came back down the stairs faster than he went up. Not quiet now, speed mattering more, and he hit the 2nd floor landing and went through the door, fast and low. And the man Marcus sent toward the stairwell was 2 steps into the office space when Adrian met him. And what happened in the next 4 seconds was not clean or controlled, but it was decisive. And the man went down, and Adrian was across the room before Marcus fully processed what had entered it. He stopped 6 feet from Marcus. Marcus looked at him with those calm, assessing eyes, and something moved across his face, not surprise. Not quite. more like the recalibration of a man updating his model. "You're supposed to be with Fel," Marcus said. "Fel and I had a short conversation." Alara was already out of the chair. She didn't run. She stood and moved laterally and positioned herself at an angle that put one of Marcus's flanking men in an awkward position relative to both of them. And the flanking man noticed and shifted, and in shifting, created a gap. She moved through the gap. Marcus's hand went up a gesture to his people. "Stop." And they stopped, because Marcus's authority in this organization, even this fractured version of it, was still real. He had built it over 7 years, and it did not dissolve in a single morning. "This is what you get," Marcus said. He was talking to both of them now, moving his gaze between them with a deliberateness that was itself a kind of performance. "This is what you get when you let sentiment drive decisions. Both of you, in this room, completely exposed, because you can't separate the professional from the personal." He shook his head, and the motion had in it a quality of genuine, almost sorrowful contempt. "I built something here. A real future. Not for the Sislen group, for the people in this organization, who were going to be left holding nothing when Adrian's inheritance finally caught up with him. I was protecting them. By selling their communication infrastructure to a European syndicate," Adrian said. "By ensuring a transition rather than a collapse." Marcus's voice hardened. "Your father's debts were always going to come due, Adrian. I was managing the landing. Who asked you to manage it? Nobody. That's the point. Nobody ever manages the thing that needs managing until it's too late, and then they ask you why you didn't do something." He gestured a wide, almost helpless motion. "I did something." The room was very still. Adrian looked at Marcus, really looked at him, the way he hadn't in years, because you stopped looking carefully at people. You thought you knew completely, and he saw the thing he'd missed. Not malice exactly. Something more complicated, and in some ways worse, genuine belief. Marcus had told himself a story about what he was doing, and had lived inside that story for 14 months, and the story had become true to him in the way that all stories become true to the people who need them most. "You killed people," Adrian said. "The 11 contacts whose information was on those servers when that data reaches the Selen group. That's a consequence of your father's choices. Not mine." Victor Lane, Alara's voice. Quiet and completely without heat, which was more frightening than anger. 11 years ago. "Did you know what Fel was coordinating?" Marcus looked at her. A long look. "I knew afterward. And you said nothing. I was 29 years old, and I had just watched what happened to people who said something." He met her gaze. "I made a choice I've lived with every day since." "That's not absolution," she said. "I never said it was." The skylight above them shifted a shadow, moving across it, fast, and then a sound on the roof that registered a half-second before Adrian processed it. Footsteps. Multiple, moving from the north face toward the center. Alara heard it too. She looked up, and in her eyes he saw the thing he'd been waiting for since last night. Not relief. Recognition. Her pebble. The roof access point. She had known the building layout before she walked in. She had walked into Marcus's controlled situation, knowing something Marcus didn't know she knew, and held the pressure until the metal chair for 40 minutes, not waiting to be rescued, but waiting for the time her people needed to get into position above them. Marcus heard the roof sounds now. He looked up, then looked at Alara, and the recalibration on his face this time was faster and more complete, and carried with it the specific quality of a man understanding that the room he thought he controlled has belonged to someone else the whole time. "How many?" Marcus said. "Enough," Alara said. And then the skylights came open. 3 of them, simultaneously, and 4 people came through fast on rappel lines down to the floor in under 3 seconds. Weapons up, professional and economical, and not at all interested in unnecessary movement. Marcus's men reacted, and the room erupted into the specific chaos of a space where the balance of force has just shifted completely, and everyone is recalculating whether what they're holding is worth dying for. 2 of Marcus's men decided it wasn't. 1 decided it was. The next 40 seconds were loud and brutal and confined, and when it was over, Adrian had a split lip from a collision with someone's elbow, and Alara had reopened the cut above her eyebrow and was pressing the back of her hand against it with the distracted irritation of someone who'd been interrupted in the middle of a calculation. Marcus was on the floor, not shot-contained, one of Alara's people behind him, the physical reality of the situation resolved. He looked up at Adrian from the floor. "It's done," Adrian said. "This part," Marcus said. He was breathing hard, the only concession he'd made to the physical reality of the last minute. "This part is done. But the data transfer completed. Fells in the wind. And the Selene group doesn't need Marcus Rain to finish what's already in motion. Port corridor. 6 facilities. They'll have operational control by tonight." He looked at Adrian with those tired, certain eyes. "You can contain me. You can even find Fell. But you can't undo a data transfer, and you can't stop an organization with the Selene Group's resources from completing a 6-month infrastructure acquisition in a single afternoon." He paused. "It's over, Adrian. The only question left is what you negotiate for and what you walk away from." Adrian looked at Alara. She was looking at him. Her hand had dropped from her eyebrow. The cut was still bleeding, a thin line along her temple, and she didn't seem to care about it. She was looking at him with the same patient, with watching quality he had spent 3 years misreading as detachment and now understood was something entirely different, was the look of a person who had been waiting for the moment when someone else in the room finally had all the information she had, because she didn't want to make this decision alone. "The 6th facility," he said to her. "The Castellan operation. Still independent. As of an hour ago, yes. Nadia has aligned to them. The Selene group needs all 6 for corridor control. 5 isn't enough. The logistics don't work without the northern terminus." He was thinking fast, assembling it as he spoke. "Castellan facility doesn't transfer. The corridor is incomplete. Incomplete means the entire acquisition has no operational value. They'd have 5 facilities they can't profitably run without the 6th. Alara was very still. "You want to use the Castellan operation as a leverage point," she said. "I want to use everything we have left as a leverage point and meet the Selene group at a table they didn't invite us to." He looked at her. "You said your network has 48 hours for full deployment. We have 6 hours before the corridor acquisition completes. How much can you move in 6 hours?" She thought about it, genuinely thought, not performing consideration. He could see her running numbers behind her eyes. "Enough to make the table real," she said. "But Adrian, the Selene group doesn't negotiate with people who just disrupted an operation. They respond to disruption with escalation. Then we need to disrupt them badly enough that escalation costs more than the table." He looked at Marcus on the floor. "And we need everything Marcus knows about their operational timeline. All of it. Right now." Marcus looked up from the floor, and for a long moment said absolutely nothing. And in that silence, Adrian understood that the next thing Marcus said was going to determine whether there was any version of this that didn't end completely badly for everyone in the room. Marcus said, "There's a meeting tonight. The Selene Group's operational director is flying in to personally oversee the corridor handover. That meeting is in 4 hours." Where Marcus closed his eyes, opened them, looked at the ceiling, the Hartwell Tower, penthouse. "It's booked under a Luxembourg subsidiary. You won't find it through normal channels. But you have the access. I have the access." Adrian crouched down in front of Marcus, not threatening, just eye level. "The way you talk to someone when you need the full truth and threats have stopped being the most efficient tool. Why are you giving this to me?" he said. Marcus looked at him. Something in his face had shifted. The wall that had been there all morning had developed a crack, and through the crack was something older and more honest. "Because Fell told me something 3 days ago," Marcus said. "Something is about what the Selene Group plans to do with the port corridor once they have it. Not just financially." He stopped. "There are people in this city who depend on the physical infrastructure those facilities represent. Workers, families. Fell told me what the new operational model looks like, and He stopped again, and the stop was not rhetorical. It was a man hitting a wall inside himself. "I didn't sign on for that. Whatever I convinced myself about managed transitions and inevitable change, I didn't sign on for that." The room was quiet. Adrian stood up. He looked at Alara. She was looking at Marcus with something that was not forgiveness, not mercy, but was at least the acknowledgement that human beings were complicated machines that sometimes produced unexpected output. 4 hours, Adrian said. 4 hours, she confirmed. He took a breath. His lip was swelling. His hands were steady. Then we have 4 hours to build something that walks into that penthouse with enough force to change the terms of a deal that was supposed to be already done. He looked at Alara. I need your full network. Whatever you can move. I'm already moving it, she said. And somewhere in the building, her phone had begun to ring 4 calls in sequence. The pattern she'd told him meant her people were in position, and the morning outside, the warehouse windows was getting brighter, and Marcus Reese was still on the floor. And Cyrus Fell was somewhere in the city with a completed data transfer and a head start. And Selene Group's until the light changed, and the Selene Group's operational director was 40,000 feet above the Atlantic, moving toward a meeting that he fully expected to be the formality at the end of a completed acquisition. He was about to have a very different evening. Adrian moved toward the door. Adrian. Alara's voice. Behind him, he turned. She was standing in the middle of the room, the cut on her eyebrow still bleeding, her jacket torn at the left shoulder, and she looked at him with those level eyes and said, "When this is over, we talk. About all of it. Not the operational version. The actual version." He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "We do." He went through the door. "This is a work of cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are entirely invented. The Hartwell Tower penthouse had 42 floors of empty air beneath it, and a view of the harbor that on a clear evening showed the full sweep of the port corridor, all 6 facilities, lit against the dark water like a string of cold diamonds. Adrian had been in the building twice before, years ago, for legitimate business meetings that had nothing to do with anything that mattered now. He remembered the elevator, the way it opened directly into the penthouse reception rather than a hallway. The single point of entry that was also the single point of exit. He remembered thinking, the second time he visited, that it was a beautiful trap. Still a beautiful trap. They had 3 hours and 40 minutes from the time they left Kellner Street, and they used all of it. Alara's network moved in the way that well-prepared things move when they're built for finally they were bribed. It's not frantically, not with the improvised energy of people scrambling, but with the particular efficiency of systems executing plans they have rehearsed. Adrian watched it happen from the back of a vehicle moving through midday traffic, Alara beside him on the phone in a continuous low-voiced sequence of calls, and he understood for the first time the full scale of what she had been constructing during 3 years of quiet evenings and 2 laptop sessions. It was not a small thing. She had 14 people inside the city, former intelligence operatives, 2 former federal investigators who had left their respective agencies under circumstances that gave them professional motivation to see certain organizations disrupted, 3 financial forensic specialists who had spent years building the documentary case against the Selene Group's East Coast expansion, and a core of 5 who did the kind of work that didn't have a formal job title. They had physical infrastructure, 4 vehicles, 2 safe locations, a communication system that ran on hardware. Isaris had sourced through channels completely independent of anything Fell had ever touched, and she had the Castellan family. Nadia had reached them at 7 that morning, and the conversation had been brief because the Castellan operation had already known. Something was wrong. They'd seen the surveillance, noticed the pattern of vehicles around their facility, and had been sitting on the information without knowing who to trust with it. When Nadia made contact through a channel that referenced a specific private arrangement between old Joseph Castellan and Victor Lane that went back 20 years, the old man had listened for 4 minutes and then said, in the direct way of someone who had survived in a difficult business by being direct, "Tell me what you need." What they needed was for the Castellan facility to remain independent for 6 more hours, and to have that fact communicated clearly and officially to the Selene Group's operational director before his plane landed. Joseph Castellan sent a 1-page letter by secure courier to the Luxembourg subsidiary's registered legal representative. The letter was brief. It stated that the Castellan family's facility was not and would not be part of any corridor acquisition, and that any attempt to change this position would be met with the immediate release of 3 years of documented financial intelligence to 4 separate regulatory bodies across 2 continents. The letter arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon. Adrian knew this because Alara received confirmation at 2:48, read it, and for the first time since the marina showed the ghost of something that wasn't a calculation. "That's the wedge," she said. "Now we need to be on the other side of it when it lands," he said. She looked at him. "Marcus's access code for the penthouse, if it's been flagged since this morning." "It won't have been," Adrian said. "The Selene group doesn't know Marcus is contained. He's been their primary liaison. They have no reason to revoke his credentials until he fails to appear for the handover meeting." He paused. "We have a window between when they expect him and when they decide something is wrong. 30 minutes maybe less." She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "Then we use the window." Declan met them at a parking structure 2 blocks from the Hartwell Tower at 4:15. He had a folded paper in his hand, a floor plan, hand-drawn from memory, with the careful precision of someone who had learned early that written intelligence had a way of surviving its usefulness. He spread it on the hood of the car and walked them through it, without dramatics, pointing with one finger, keeping his voice flat and factual. Penthouse level has a central reception space. That's where the elevator opens. East wing is the meeting space, floor-to-ceiling windows on the harbor side. West wing is support kitchen, 2 side rooms, utility access. The Selene Group's operational director travels with 4 personal security. Standard configuration for this level of meeting is 2 in the reception, 2 inside the meeting room. "Staff," Alara said. "Building staff have been cleared from the penthouse level for the evening." The Selene Group brought in their own catering and support personnel, 4 additional people. But they're not security trained. Cameras, building system. But the Selene Group will have added their own. We have to assume additional coverage in the elevator and reception. Adrian looked at the floor plan. The utility access in the west wing. Where does it connect? Service elevator. Separate shaft from the main elevator. Goes from the basement loading dock to the penthouse mechanical room, which connects to the west wing utility corridor. Declan looked at him. It's not a clean approach. The mechanical room will be locked and possibly monitored, but it bypasses the reception. Yes. Alara was looking at the floor plan with her arms folded. If we use the service route, we arrive in the meeting space from the west, rather than the reception. They're expecting anyone who matters to come through the front elevator. She looked at Adrian. They won't be positioned for a west entry. "How long does the service elevator take?" Adrian said. "Slow lift. Probably 3 minutes from the loading dock. Can your people hold the loading dock?" Declan nodded once. Adrian straightened up from the floor plan. His lip had swollen more in the past 2 hours, and his left side had a dull, persistent ache from the collision at Kellner Street that he was not going to examine too closely because examining it would make it real, and making it real would slow him down. He was running on the specific fuel of someone who has nothing left to lose that they weren't already prepared to lose. "The Selene Group's director," he said to Alara. "What do we know about him?" "His name is Eduard Sorin, 63 years old, operated in European financial crime networks for 30 years before the Selene Group elevated him to operational director 4 years ago. He is not a man who became this powerful by being inflexible." She looked at Adrian. "He responds to force when force is the available language. But his preference, his actual preference, is resolution. He does not enjoy operational chaos. We're going to give him operational chaos and then offer him resolution. Yes. The Castellan letter is the chaos. The question is what resolution we're offering." She held his gaze. "We offer him a functional corridor without the cost of an ongoing war with 2 organizations that now know everything about his acquisition infrastructure and have the documentary evidence to trigger regulatory action across 6 jurisdictions." She paused. "We give him a choice between a controlled arrangement and a catastrophic exposure, and we give him 30 seconds to decide. He'll want guarantees. He'll get documented ones. I have the financial forensic team standing by to serve as custodians. The evidence package stays sealed as long as the arrangement holds." She kept her eyes on his. "It's not a perfect solution. No. It's the solution that keeps the most people alive." He held her gaze for a long moment. Outside the parking structure, the city moved through its late afternoon rhythms, indifferent and continuous, and he thought about the 11 contacts whose information had been transferred That morning, and the 3 police that Alara's people still hadn't reached, and the 6 port facilities lit up against the harbor, and the specific version of his life that had ended this morning in a courthouse, and the version that was standing in a parking structure at 4:15, deciding whether to walk into a penthouse trap. "All right," he said. They went. The loading dock of the Hartwell Tower was accessed through a service alley that smelled of compacted cardboard and standing water. Declan's people had been there for 20 minutes, and the dock was quiet. A single building maintenance worker who had been gently redirected to a different task by 2 of Alara's people who had the specific quality of being extremely persuasive without raising their voices. The service elevator was old and deliberate, as Declan had said. 3 minutes of humming mechanical ascent, with the 4 of them, Adrian, Alara, and 2 of her people standing in a space that smelled of lubricant and old metal, and nobody talked. Alara had her eyes on the floor indicator. One of her people, a lean woman in her 40s named Petra, who had said approximately 8 words since Adrian met her, and all of them had been specific and useful, had a phone in her hand, showing a live feed from a camera that one of their people had accessed on the building's maintenance system. 2 in the reception, Petra said quietly, reading the feed. The meeting room, 4 people visible. Director is seated. 3 others. Where are the reception 2 positioned? Alara said. Facing the main elevator. Backs to the west corridor. Adrian and Alara looked at each other. The elevator reached the penthouse level and the doors opened onto the mechanical room. And from there they moved through to the utility corridor, in the dark, by phone light, held low, the sounds of the building's climate systems loud around them. The corridor ran the length of the west wing and ended at a door marked Staff, Authorized Entry. Adrian put his hand on the door handle, looked at Alara. She nodded. He pushed through. The west wing opened onto a short hallway that connected to the main meeting room through an internal door, and that door had a strip of light beneath it and the sound of voices beyond it. 2 voices, one older and European accented, one younger and fast. Business conversation. Numbers. Timeline confirmation. Adrian opened the door. The meeting room was exactly what the floor plan had shown long, glass-walled on the harbor side. The port facilities visible in the distance as the light faded. A conference table. 6 chairs. 3 men on the far side. 1 woman near the window who reached for something the moment the door opened. And at the head of the table, a man Adrian recognized from the photograph Alara had shown him 2 hours earlier. Eduard's Soren. Soren was compact and gray-haired, and wore a suit that was expensive without displaying that fact. And his face, when he saw Adrian and Alara come through the west door, carried the particular quality of a man recalibrating rapidly without letting the recalibration show. The woman near the window had her hand on a phone now, not a weapon. Smart. She had assessed the situation in less than 2 seconds and made the right decision. "Mr. Voss," Soren said. He looked at Alara. "Ms. Vale." He said both names with the flat accuracy of someone who has been thoroughly briefed. "This is unexpected, I know," Adrian said. He moved to the near side of the table and stood with his hands visible. Alara moved to his right. Her 2 people positioned themselves without instruction, one at the internal door, one remaining near the west entry. Not threatening. Present. We'll keep it brief. Soren looked at the internal door where his own people were, on the other side. He looked at the west entry. He made the calculation that Adrian had been hoping he'd make, which was that the situation he was in was not one that improved through escalation. "Sit," Soren said to his own people. They sat. He looked at Adrian. Apparently, Adrian sat. Alara sat beside him. "The Castellan letter," Adrian said. "I received it." Soren's voice was careful and neutral, the voice of someone who has negotiated from difficult positions before, and knows that the first thing to control is your own register. An inconvenience. "A 6-facility corridor requires 6 facilities," Alara said. "Without the Castellan Northern Terminus, the logistics model you've built for the acquisition doesn't generate the projected returns. The operating costs on 5 facilities, without the integrated throughput the model requires." "I understand the economics," Soren said. "Then you understand that as of this afternoon, you have a 5-facility acquisition that isn't worth what you paid for it." Soren looked at her steadily. "What you're describing is a temporary complication. Castellan family's position is negotiable. Not through any channel you currently have, Adrian said. Because every channel you currently have, including your primary organizational liaison, who you're expecting at this table in approximately. He glanced at his watch. 11 minutes has been removed from the board. A very precise silence. Marcus Rain, Soren said. Yes, and Cyrus Fell. Fell is still mobile, Adrian said honestly. But the data transfer he completed this morning has been quarantined at the receiving end. Your technical team will find when they attempt to access it that the package is encrypted with a key that was generated by systems Fell doesn't have the current credentials for. He watched Soren's face. Alara updated her network encryption 48 hours ago. Fell's access was based on intelligence that was already 18 months stale. This was the piece Alara had not told him until the vehicle ride over, and he had looked at her when she explained and felt the specific vertigo of understanding that she had been three moves ahead of Fell since before Fell had moved against her. Soren absorbed this. He looked at Alara with an expression that had in it something approaching professional respect, not warm, not personal, but the acknowledgement that one serious person sometimes extends to another. What do you want? He said. A functional arrangement, Alara said. Not surrender, not capitulation. An arrangement that gives the Selen Group a viable commercial position in the northeastern corridor without the cost of an ongoing conflict that now hold documented evidence of your acquisition methodology across 6 jurisdictions. She placed a thumb drive on the table. That drive contains a custodial copy of everything we have. A second copy is held in escrow with 3 separate legal entities in different jurisdictions. As long as a mutually agreed arrangement is maintained, those copies stay sealed. Soren looked at the thumb drive. He didn't touch it. And the Castellan facility, he said, remains independent. You work around it or you negotiate commercially on terms that don't involve coercion. She held his gaze. Those are the terms. Soren was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the room became uncomfortable with it. His 3 people were still, waiting for his signal in whatever direction it went. The harbor light outside was going orange and low. The port facilities lit up now as the day faded, and the whole corridor was visible from this chair. The thing Soren had flown a long way to formalize, that had cost a significant amount of planning and money, and the active cooperation of people, and the activist of people who were no longer on the board. Picked up the thumb drive. He looked at it. There is a man, he said, named Cyrus Fell, who is currently, as you say, still mobile. He set the drive down carefully. Fell knows things about the Selen Group's broader infrastructure that present a problem for us, regardless of the arrangement we reach in this room. He was our asset. He is no longer within our operational control. He looked at Adrian. If you locate him, we would consider that a significant gesture of good faith. Adrian looked at Alara. She said, "We'll find him." Fell was in a hotel near the airport. They knew because Declan had put a tracker on Fell's personal vehicle 3 days earlier, not on Adrian's instruction, but on Declan's own initiative, because Declan was the kind of man who tracked things he didn't fully trust as a matter of professional habit. He had never mentioned it to Adrian, because there had been nothing to report until tonight, when the vehicle's signal appeared at the long-term parking structure of an airport-adjacent hotel and stayed there. They sent Petra. Adrian wasn't there for what happened next, and Alara gave him only the essential information afterward. Fell was located. His remaining copies of the transferred data were secured, and Fell himself was delivered to a location where the appropriate federal authorities contacted, through one of Alara's former intelligence connections, could receive him, along with 11 years of documented evidence concerning the Geneva operation and the death of Victor Lane. Fell did not resist. Alara said this last part without particular satisfaction, which Adrian thought said something true about her, that she had spent 11 years working toward this, and when it arrived, she received it the way you receive the end of a long illness. Not triumph. Relief that has forgotten how to feel like relief. They were sitting in the Hartwell Towers lobby. By then, on a bench near the window, the city outside gone fully dark. The meeting with Soren had lasted 40 minutes and ended with a signed memorandum, not a warm document. Not a comfortable one, but a real one, with specific terms and specific enforcement mechanisms, and Soren's signature in the unhurried hand of a man who had accepted the situation and intended to honor what he'd agreed to, because the cost of not honoring it was clearly and specifically defined. Adrian sat on the bench with his elbows on his knees and looked at the street outside. His lip hurt, his left side hurt. He was tired in a way that went past the physical, the accumulated weight of 24 hours that had dismantled and rebuilt the architecture of everything he thought he'd understood about his own life. Alara was beside him, not touching him, turned slightly to watch the lobby's revolving door. The 11 contacts, he said. 8 confirmed safe, she said. The 3 remaining my people are still working. She paused. We'll get them. If we don't, we'll get them. Not reassurance. Intention. He nodded. Marcus, he said. That's your decision. He thought about it. About 7 years, and what he'd thought he'd known, and the specific kind of grief that arrived when you understood that someone you trusted had been making different decisions than you believed in the same spaces where you thought you were building something shared. He gave us Soren, Adrian said. He gave us Soren because he decided what the Selene Group's endgame actually looked like, and he didn't want to be part of it. She said it carefully, not making it more than it was. That's not redemption. It's a man hitting a wall inside himself and making a different choice when the wall appeared. Is there a difference? She thought about that for a genuine moment. I don't know, she said. Maybe the difference is what they do after. He looked at her. She was looking at the street, her profile lit by the lobby's ambient light. The cut above her eyebrow closed now, with a butterfly strip that Petra had applied with the brisk, impersonal efficiency of someone who had done this many times. She looked tired, too, and real, and nothing like the woman he had watched across a courthouse lobby 36 hours ago, or maybe exactly like that woman. Only now he could read her correctly. Your father's involvement, she said, not turning to look at him. What you decide to do with that? Nothing, he said. He's been dead for 6 years. There's no version of accountability that reaches him. He paused. What I can do is what I've already started, the legitimate businesses. Parts of the organization that don't require what the rest of it requires. I've been managing the transition for 2 years. After tonight, I have more reason and less obstacle. She turned to look at him now. You were already dismantling it, she said. Trying to. He met her eyes quietly, without advertising it, to people who had an interest in the existing structure. He held her gaze. Marcus knew. He thought I was going to dismantle his future, which is part of why he started building a different one. She was quiet for a moment. You should have told me. You should have told me about Victor. Yes, she said. I should have. The lobby revolved around them, a night security guard making his rounds, a late-arriving hotel guest at the front desk, the city outside moving at its own unhurried pace. The divorce, Adrian said, is still legal, she said. I know. I'm not, she stopped. Started again more carefully. I don't want to undo it the way you might undo a mistake. What happened in those 3 years wasn't a mistake. It was real and complicated, and I don't want to erase it by reversing it as if it didn't happen. He looked at her. That's not what I was going to say. She looked back. I was going to say, he said, that I spent 3 years in the same rooms as you and I didn't look. Not really. He held her gaze steadily. I looked at what I assumed you were, and I stopped there. That's on me. Not the marriage, the looking. You looked at what was convenient, she said. Not accusatory. Precise. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I looked at what I needed you to be, too, in the beginning. And then somewhere in the middle of it, that stopped being the framework, and I didn't know what to do with what replaced it. He understood what she was saying. He didn't ask her to elaborate, because elaboration would have made it smaller. The yacht, he said. Something moved in her expression, something lighter than what had been there all day. What about it? It's docked at the Harwick Marina, which you own, which I own, and you're staying. She looked at him. I'm staying. He nodded slowly. Outside's a delivery vehicle pulled up to the curb, and a man got out and opened the back and began moving boxes through the hotel's service entrance, and the ordinary mechanics of the city continued their indifferent business. and Adrian Voss sat on a bench in a hotel lobby with his ex-wife beside him and the remains of everything he'd inherited in a pile somewhere behind him, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific sensation of a future that was not predetermined. 3 months passed. The Selene Group held to the memorandum, not warmly, there was nothing warm about it, but with the functional compliance of an organization that had done its cost-benefit analysis and arrived at the correct conclusion. 5-facility corridor operated at a reduced efficiency that was, precisely as Alara had told Soren it would be, not worth the investment. Commercial negotiations with the Castellan family began in the 4th month, quietly, through legitimate channels, on terms that Joseph Castellan's lawyers described as acceptable. Cyrus Fell was charged by federal authorities in connection with the Geneva operation, secretion, and 4 additional conspiracy counts related to his activities over the past 11 years. The charges were the result of an investigation that had been, technically, ongoing for several years, but had lacked the specific documentation necessary to proceed. That documentation arrived through channels that the federal record described only as a confidential source. The trial was scheduled for the following year. Marcus Rain spent 6 weeks in a situation that was not comfortable and not resolved. And then, in a meeting with Adrian that lasted 1 hour and covered 20 minutes of real content, arrived at an arrangement that neither of them would have described as forgiveness, but which both of them understood as the only functional path forward for a man who had made catastrophic decisions and then, at the wall, made a different one. Marcus left the city. He did not leave badly. He simply left. The 11 contacts, all 11, in the end were confirmed safe. The 3 who had been most difficult to reach were found in the 3rd week through a channel that Alara's network had built, specifically for this kind of emergency, and never previously had to use. The 12th person Adrian had been uncertain about turned out not to have been on the compromised system at all, having been moved to a different communication protocol 6 months earlier by Declan, for reasons entirely unrelated to the current situation. Declan remained. He reorganized the remaining legitimate structure with the methodical care of someone who understood that the value in what was left was in doing it correctly, not quickly. The parts of the organization that had required what they had required were unwound over 4 months not cleanly, because these things were never clean, but with a completeness that Adrian tracked personally, and that Alara reviewed from the outside with the specific eye of someone who had spent 3 years studying the architecture, and knew exactly which. Walls were load-bearing, and which were decoration. She did not move into the headquarters. She ran her network from the Vale Fortune, which remained moored at the Harwick Marina through the autumn and into the early winter, and she and Adrian met at the marina most evenings, and sometimes not at all for several days, and neither of them treated the arrangement as a thing that needed definition more than it needed time. It was a Tuesday evening in November when Adrian walked down the pier and found her on the aft deck with the glass of something and a folder of documents she'd been working through, and the harbor lights reflected in the water below the hull in long rippling strips. She looked up when she heard him on the boarding platform. He sat down across from her in the other deck chair without being invited, because that had stopped requiring an invitation somewhere around the 2nd month, and for a while neither of them spoke. The harbor was quiet. A container ship moved in the distance, its lights slow and massive. The Selene Group's legal team made contact today, she said, about the Castellan terms, about broadening them. They want to include 2 additional facilities that weren't part of the original corridor discussion. She looked at him over the rim of her glass. It would restructure the whole arrangement. Is the restructuring good or bad? Complicated, she said, which is different from bad. He looked at the harbor. What do you think? I think it's worth a conversation. She looked at him. Your conversation, too, not mine alone. He looked back at her. I know, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the water. He watched her profile, the specific quality of her stillness, which he had spent 3 years misreading and now read correctly as the surface of something active and continuous. I didn't know how to trust someone, he said. Specifically, not in theory and practice, with the actual texture of it, the daily version. She didn't respond immediately. I know, she said finally. Neither did I. Victor taught you the operational version. Victor taught me that everything had an operational version, and that was the version worth learning. She turned her glass in her hand. He was right about a lot of things. That wasn't one of them. He was quiet for a moment. What's the non-operational version? She looked at him. You show up, she said, even when it's inconvenient, even when you don't have a plan. She paused. You came to the marina that night without a plan. Came to the marina without a plan, he confirmed. That was the first honest thing you did in our marriage. He thought about that. It landed the way true things land, not softly, but completely. I'm trying to do more of that, he said. I know, she said. I can tell. The harbor moved below them. The container ship had reached the edge of the visible distance and was becoming part of the dark. Alara reached across the space between the two chairs and set her hand on the armrest of his, not quite touching his hand, close enough that the decision about what happened next belonged to both of them equally. He turned his hand over. They sat like that for a while, in the quiet of a Tuesday evening in November, with the harbor lights below and the future, somewhere in the dark, ahead of them, not simple, not clean, not anything that could be summarized in the terms they'd once used for the things they'd once wanted, but real and chosen, and entirely their own. The harbor had a way of going quiet after 10 at night that the rest of the city never managed. The container traffic slowed, the dock crews changed shifts, and the water settled into a rhythm that belonged only to itself, patient and indifferent and older than anything built along its edges. Adrian sat on the aft deck of the Vale Fortune and listened to it. Alara had gone inside 20 minutes ago to finish a call with the Castellan family's legal team, and he'd stayed in the deck chair with his second glass of whiskey barely touched, watching the lights of the port corridor string themselves across the far side of the harbor like a sentence he was still learning to read. 3 months ago, those lights had represented the thing men like Eduard Soren spent careers maneuvering to control. Tonight they were just lights on water. The difference was not in the lights. She came back through the salon door with a light jacket over her shoulders and sat across from him and looked at the harbor without speaking first, which was still one of the things about her. He found most disorienting the willingness to let silence be silence, instead of filling it with the noise of needing to be understood. Castellan's lawyers want a meeting in person, she said eventually. New York, end of the month. I'll come. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the water. Something settled in her shoulders, barely visible, the kind of thing you only caught if you had learned to watch carefully. He had learned to watch carefully. Fell's preliminary hearing is Thursday, she said. I know. You don't need to be there either. I'm not going to be. He set his glass down on the deck rail. Whatever happens in that courtroom is the legal system doing what it does. I gave them what I had. That part's done. She nodded slowly. He looked at her. How are you with it? The actual end of it fell, the charges, the whole thing finally being in someone else's hands. She thought about this the way she thought about things that deserved real answers, actually thought, not performed consideration. Strange, she said. I spent so long carrying the weight of it that I don't quite know what to do with my hands now that I've set it down. She looked at him directly. Does that make sense? Yes, he said. It makes complete sense. She looked at him for a moment, longer than she needed to. Your father. What about him? Have you made peace with it? What he was? What he did? He exhaled slowly. The harbor moved below them. No, he said. I don't think peace is the right word for it. I've accepted it. The difference between accepting something and being at peace with it is real. He paused. He was my father, and he built things that hurt people, and he made decisions I would not have made, and he died before I could ask him why. And all of that is just true. All of it at the same time. She was quiet for a moment. Victor was not a good man, she said, by most measures. He did things I knew about, and things I later found out about, and things I probably never will. And he was the only person who sat with me in a hospital. In the winter I was 14 and didn't leave. She looked at the water. People are not one thing. No, he said. They're not. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that two people build slowly over time, without meaning, to made of shared understanding and the accumulated weight of having seen each other at the worst angles and stayed in the room anyway. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and set a small object on the deck rail between them. A key. She looked at it without touching it. The building on Marsh Street, he said. The legitimate side of what's left the logistics company, the property management, the consulting infrastructure. I'm putting it into a trust structure with independent directors. He looked at her. I want you on the board, not as my ex-wife, not as a courtesy, as someone who spent 3 years understanding the architecture of it better than I did. She looked at the key for a long moment. That's a real offer, she said. That's a real offer. She picked it up, turned it in her fingers, set it back down, but did not push it back toward him. Think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She looked at him. Something in her face had opened slightly, the careful professional composure still there, but no longer the whole of what was visible. You know what I thought, she said, the morning of the courthouse, when I signed the papers. Tell me. I thought this is the cleanest version of the exit. I walk out, the restrictions lift, I execute the plan, and whatever it was we had doesn't need to be examined, because the examination would cost more than the plan could afford. She looked at her hands. I had convinced myself that was rational. It was rational. It was incomplete. She looked up at him. There's a version of rational that accounts for everything except what it costs. That's you personally, and I was very good at that version for a very long time. He held her gaze, and now I'm trying a different version. She almost smiled, not quite, but close. It's slower, yeah, he said. It is. She picked up his barely touched whiskey from the rail and took a sip and handed it back, which was the kind of small, unself-conscious thing that meant more than its own smallness. And he accepted it without making anything of it, because that was the point. The harbor moved. The lights held their positions across the water. Somewhere beyond the port corridor, a ship was making its way outbound, its running lights patient and slow against the dark. They sat together on the deck of the Veil Fortune and did not make promises they couldn't keep or describe what the future was going to look like, because neither of them was built for that kind of certainty, and both of them had learned, at significant cost, that certainty was often just the name you gave to something you hadn't looked at closely enough yet. What they had was the deck and the harbor and the quiet of a November night and the slow, difficult, entirely voluntary work of two people choosing to be known. That was enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. The end.